Let's start with a very interesting pro-revenge story from an unknown account. That's not your car, lady. So this happened around 2008. My buddy Brock had gotten out of the military after 10 years. He'd started in the Marines, but transitioned into the Army for the last 4 years before buying a house in Texas. When he got out, he did a variety of jobs before landing a gig with a repo service. He worked there for a year and had a lot of wild stories, but this one sticks out the most as he helped a fellow soldier get revenge on an evil ex. Brock was at the office speaking with his manager, whom I'll refer to as Karen. Now, this particular Karen had a lot of Karen-like qualities, but was a force for good if you can believe that. While they were talking, they see a young man enter the office. They immediately noticed he had two black eyes and an arm was in a sling. The young man, whose name I unfortunately never learned but I'll call Ben, asked how hard it would be for them to help repossess his car. Karen called her daughter in, Karen Jr., and had her poor Ben a cup of coffee. Karen then asked Ben to tell her a story. Ben began with telling her that he had just returned from a deployment. He had been dating a local girl that lived outside of the famous Fort Hood, not a good idea BTW, before the deployment. Thanks to a previous deployment, he had managed to get himself a used black Dodge Charger, which was his baby. He further explained that shortly after buying the car, he had met the local girl, who for the sake of the story, I'll call Morgan. Morgan was always asking to drive his car, but he would always decline. When he was getting ready for his deployment, Morgan repeatedly asked if she could borrow the car, but he kept saying no. After much needling, he relented, but on the condition that she take care of his apartment until he comes back from rest and relaxation leave. She agreed. Ben left for his deployment while Morgan took care of his place. When Ben came back for leave, he found his apartment immaculate. He pulled his car from storage, drove to Morgan's. He spent a few days with her before handing her the keys and heading to his home state to visit family before returning to his deployment. He returned again from his deployment and found nothing but trouble. When he walked into his apartment, he found a layer of dust on just about every surface. It was almost like no one had been there in months. When he checked his bedroom, he'd found his room had been torn apart. All of his drawers had been searched and upturned. He tried to call Morgan, but never received an answer. He located his safe, which was hidden, and found it hadn't been touched. He then grabbed his spare key from the safe, called a buddy of his, and they went to Morgan's. As they pulled up to Morgan's, he saw a car there that he initially didn't recognize, but as they got closer, he realized it was his baby. Morgan had the car painted hot pink and put 24-inch spinners on it. He tried the key just to make sure, and the lights flickered as it unlocked. While his buddy laughed, Ben went to the front door and Morgan answered. He asked what happened to his car, and she responded, "It's my car now." Ben walked away and hopped in his hot pink mess. As he started it, 4 large dudes came out of Morgan's house, one with a baseball bat, and yanked Ben out of his car. They proceeded to beat the crap out of him in the driveway before his friend intervened, pulling his conceal and carry pistol on the group. He then took Ben to the hospital. I'm honestly not sure if the cops were called on this. I'd assume yes, but even then Ben said his friend drove by Morgan's house a handful of times while he was in the hospital at random times and the car was never there. Karen stared at Ben for a bit before asking for the paperwork. Ben handed it to her and Karen had a smile form on her face. She then asked Ben for Morgan's phone number. Ben gave it but wasn't aware of what was about to happen. Karen handed the phone to Karen Jr., who then dialed the number. Karen Jr. then began speaking to Morgan, telling her that they'd met at one of the local clubs and wanted to know if she was down to party that night. Apparently Morgan agreed, and the plan was set. Brock parked his tow truck at the club and waited. Sure enough, Morgan showed up with the pink monster, parked it, and went inside with some girlfriends. Brock gave them 5 minutes before he stealthily drove up to the car and hooked it up. As he was pulling out with the pink monster, Morgan walked out of the club. She saw her car in the tow truck and began trying to flag Brock down, but he was already out of there. The next day, it was business as usual at the office when Morgan called. She was furious that her car was stolen by them and wanted it back. Karen, using her best customer service voice, told her if she had the registration, she could come pick it up. Morgan began screaming louder that she was going to call the cops, at which point Karen sarcastically told her, "Please do," then hung up on her. As this phone call was going on, Brock happened to look out the window and saw Morgan standing next to a car in a vacant lot, throwing what appeared to be a temper tantrum. After Karen hung up, Brock watched her get in the car on the passenger side. Karen then looked out the window and had Brock verify it was her. She then began to smirk. Karen then proceeded to call the owner of the property Morgan and her friend were occupying. She told the owner about the car and asked if he wanted it towed. The owner okayed it. Brock then drove his truck over to the ladies in the car and introduced himself. They tried to explain that they were waiting for Morgan's boyfriend, but Brock insisted they weren't allowed to park there. They argued and called him every name in the book. Brock then hooked up their car and lifted it partially off the ground, forcing the two to exit the vehicle. They tore into him until he showed them the tow order. While this back and forth was going on, Ben arrived at the office and Morgan saw him walk in. She ran to the office door and Brock proceeded to lower the car. When Brock went back to the office, all hell had broken loose. Morgan apparently tried to snag the keys back from Ben, but he pocketed them. She began to hit him in his hurt arm and warned Ben that she'd call her friends to finish the job if she didn't get her keys back. Karen Jr. had already called the cops at this point, and Brock got in between Ben and Morgan, even telling Morgan to try hitting him to find out what would happen. Morgan then tried to play the pity card and said she only wanted the keys to get her laptop out for school. Karen asked Ben to hand the keys over to Brock so he could grab the laptop. Brock retrieved the laptop from the car, and as he was handing it over, she rushed to aggressively grab it, but knocked it from Brock's hands. Completely furious at this point, Morgan accused Brock of dropping the computer on purpose and threatened to sue. The cops then arrived, and Morgan began her sob story again, telling the police that they stole her car. The police questioned Karen, and Karen gave her casual smirk while asking if they wanted to see the security videos. The police watched and listened as Morgan punched Ben several times and heard the threats she made about sending her friends after him. The police then turned to Morgan, who had turned ghost white at this point. She tried to back her way to the door, but the police stopped her. They proceeded to ask about the car, Ben's injuries, and who she planned on sending after him. She initially denied everything, but they already had evidence on her beating him up. She was arrested, and Ben got his car back. After the cops left, Ben admitted he didn't want to be seen in a car that looked like it was advertising Pepto-Bismol and planned on trading it in for a GTO. We later heard through the grapevine that the 4 guys who beat up Ben were arrested. Morgan had ratted them out. Brock had a few more stories, but none of them were nearly as good as this one. Edit. Damn, barely an hour and it's blown up a bit. Thanks, guys. Also, TL, DR evil girlfriend, tried to steal a car from her boyfriend, had him beat up, but a friendly Karen helps get it back. Edit 2. Wow, thanks for all the support, guys. I love that so many have enjoyed this story. So I've had a few people try to refute this story, and I assure you, this story is true. I have no reason to lie to anyone about this. Also, some people are asking how this is considered pro-revenge. While Ben didn't personally get the revenge, Karen was the instrument of Morgan's destruction. She set Morgan up to lose the car after Ben and his friend couldn't locate it on their own. Morgan's fate was more or less her own doing. She believed that she could strong-arm an injured man with multiple witnesses while making threats. Also, while gang activity was fairly high in the Killeen, Teek's area I'm not 100% on if they were connected to any gangs. I just want to throw that last part out there. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. Kudos to Ben's friends who helped him get his car back. It would have been impossible for Ben to get his car back on his own. Ben's ex-girlfriend got what she deserved, and it was a big win for Ben. It is truly satisfying to see Ben getting arrested. The next story is from Autumn Gemstone. Never. Ruin. You. Sisters. Prom. Dress. Disclaimer. It's not my story, it's a friend's. I don't condone it either, so please don't shoot the messenger. I make no claims of nobility in her actions, nor do I defend them. So this takes place when I was 16, wide-eyed, full of wonder, and, much to a lot of judges' displeasures, unable to be tried as an adult. I had myself a big brother we'll call Elio. And like many big brothers at the time, he was coming to terms with his flowering sexuality, among other things that went shooting up from otherwise flat surfaces whenever Robin appeared on screen in Batman Forever. He did his best to keep it a secret, plastering Playboy centerfolds over his Ariana Grande posters and stoically sitting through the game with my dad during Super Bowl parties, albeit through gritted teeth, probably wishing he could watch a Britney Spears music video instead. But much like a Nintendo Switch under the tree on Christmas Eve, you can't keep something this major under wraps for long where nosy kids are involved. The nosy kid in this case being me. Like many twins who came before him upon discovering an alternative lifestyle from the rigid confines of toxic heterosexual masculinity, Elio took it upon himself to explore his feminine side with all the zeal and passion of a prophet with a message. Mount Hira, in this scenario being a nightclub bathroom, while the angel Jibril was a 6.6 YMCA trainer who spelled his name Johnny with an I. Ironically, this eagerness to play up the girly shtick was how he came to succumb to the worst sin you can commit as a brother, stealing your sister's clothes. A message to all the gay men reading this. Her wardrobe is not your experimental laboratory, and you aren't Dr. Frankenstein. Now, in my defense, if Elio had the decency to just ask me to borrow my stuff, under the guise of shopping for some made-up girlfriend with the same shoe size, choice colors, choice height as myself, I'd have happily obliged. Heck, if he had just offered himself up as a sacrificial lamb modeling for my startup clothing line, 16-year-old me considered herself a fashionista with a penchant for designing outfits and recycling her wardrobe to bring them to life. I'd have been all too eager to be his guide into the world of women's fashion. But the two-faced bastard opted to sneak into my closet and try on my stuff without permission. He thought he was being slick putting them back when he was done. But I was a petite woman's zero, and he was a men's medium. Now, had he simply owned up to being incompatible with my measurements and admitted his crime to me the first time, I might have restrained from the retribution I'd go on to unleash. But instead, he continued to indulge in his deluded fantasy that we were the same size, and for weeks, I'd try on my clothes only to find them grotesquely stretched out of shape, with no explanation. I tried hiding my clothes in parts of the closet I didn't think the thief would check, only for him to find them. I began sleeping with my favorite clothes like a stuffed animal, but even my embrace couldn't protect them from being warped beyond wearability. I started hiding my junior prom dress under the bed. At one point, I was low-key, starting to consider the possibility that I was beginning to shrink. And had I not come home early from a cancelled SAT prep session one afternoon, my tutor got wind of a family emergency halfway through, this story might have otherwise ended with me in a straitjacket begging some burned-out shrink to save me before I went microscopic. But fate had other plans. I made a beeline for my room to find sounds coming from behind the door. Upon realizing that I was bearing witness to the dastardly clothing deformer, I hid in the bathroom in the corridor and peeked through a crack in the door for the culprit to leave my room. Imagine my shock when I discovered it was Elio. To my horror, I watched him go under my bed to place something there, and upon his departure, my worst fears were confirmed. He had tried on my beloved prom dress. Earlier in the week, I had bragged to him about the lengths I had gone to hide it from the closet ghost, thinking it would go through one ear and out the other with him, and just wanting an excuse to flex on how smart I was to take extra precautions. I storm in, demanding to know why he was wearing my clothes. He condescendingly tells me that he looks better in them than I do. I was heartbroken to find that the zipper had broken, and the fit was horribly mangled. I went down in tears, begging for my mom to tell me it could be salvaged, only for her to tell me what I prayed she wouldn't. She wasn't particularly sympathetic, thinking I had done the damage myself, and refused to buy me another one. I demanded that Elio pay me back for the dress so I could buy another, but he gave me less than half of what it cost. He refused to believe that it cost more than what I said it did, and unfortunately, My mom didn't have the receipt to prove it on account of being a bit scatterbrained when it comes to keeping track of payments. When I threatened to tell her that he was the one who ruined the dress, he laughed and said they'd never believe me. In spite of my rage and fury sending me into a frenzy of hysterics, I still knew he was right. The two-faced bastard deserved an Oscar for his straight facade, and even if he was prancing around in a rainbow unitard singing Born This Way by Lady Gaga, my folks were the type who would deny his gayness right up until the moment they came home to find him getting jackhammered on the kitchen table by a Puerto Rican bodybuilder. I realized that if I wanted to get even, I needed my own plan or action, and that was to hit him where it hurt. But where exactly is the weak spot on your brother when his standard boy ones have long since gone numb from an overuse of flashlights and his rectal cavity as a storage unit? The answers lay in his phone. After several weeks of casually walking behind the couch every time Elio whipped out his phone on it, I finally figured out his phone pin. He always locked his room, but thanks to some YouTube tutorials on how to pick a basic door lock with a bobby pin, that problem quickly resolved itself. Every time Elio went to shower, I'd sneak in and hack his phone, giving myself a 15-minute crash course on all things valued by you typical bottom. It turns out he fancied himself the next biggest thing in the drag scene. He was using my outfits to cement his status as the rising star of the social media drag scene. I thought about deleting his account, but I didn't want him suspecting me of it and tattling to my folks. Besides, he could always just create a new one and start over again. He liked Drag Race, K-pop, and iced coffee, but I couldn't exactly ruin his chances of getting on the show, and in the digital age, he had no CDS to smash or switch out. Of course, there was always the option of spiking his coffee with something nasty, but I wanted him to feel the pain I did. And that pain simply wasn't comparable to a wasted $5.99 plus tax. I was about to concede defeat after about 2 weeks of trying to find something when I discovered he'd downloaded Grindr. After my initial revulsion to the app, no, not because I was a homophobe, but because his profile and was full of his nudes, regardless of what he was into, I didn't find my brother's ding-dong appealing. I doubt any sister does. Elio wasn't really into hookups, but apparently he did like sending nudes to whoever asked for them. It's important to note that he always blurred or blacked out his face for privacy, and he appeared to color in the background of all his pictures with the image editing on his phone post-production, and he always kept his location on never. I suddenly understood why he had taken to hogging the bathroom for up to 20 minutes over the weekend. I just assumed that he was just paying the price for going to Chipotle every Friday with friends, but now I knew. He was basically trying to find the best angles for his customers. And just like that, I finally had a plan. What I did next was not something I'm proud of, but I was bitter, hurting, and desperate for payback. Not making excuses, just telling it like it is. I downloaded Grindr onto my own phone and created a fake account. I used some stock photo of a six-pack for my profile and punched in a bunch of fake info, including a spoof GPS location. Shoot out to the internet for walking me through the process. I knew it would really make a difference to my brother. He didn't really seem to care who was getting his naughty pics so much as how cute he looked in them. The boy fancied himself a bit of a male model, and I guess he decided Grindr was the best place to get a feel for the industry. Anyways, over the course of several weeks, I became one of his regulars, routinely asking him for pics, all of which I promptly deleted upon receiving. I messaged him so frequently and stroked his ego the way I knew he liked it to be stroked. I had gone through enough of the chats backed up on his phone to know what kind of compliments made him more likely to keep sending stuff instead of just getting bored and blocking someone after the second or third time he sent them pics before moving on to someone else. I boiled what made him tick down to a science, and it wasn't long before I had him eating out of the palm of my hand. Eventually, I had earned a spot in his heart as one of his exclusives. At my suggestion, we'd start having sessions where we'd schedule times for him to flood my basement, sending me caches of pics he'd taken over the course of the week, while I would live chat my reaction as to the effect they had on me. It was gross, and I always felt nauseous afterwards, but I wasn't going to let squeamish scruples stand between my revenge. Not after how far I'd come. The next phase of my plan involved my search on Pornhub for a porn star who sounded similar to my dad, with a nice loud battle cry. Do you guys see where this is going? If you want to back out now, no one will blame you. Who was typically paired up with pillow princesses with considerably softer. Eventually, after several fruitless searches ending with me crying in a fetal position, asking myself how much longer I could keep this up, and if it was worth it, followed by the world's most twisted pep talk about how I was a fighter who could do it. Basically, think that scene from Joker where Arthur puts on his clown makeup crying and you've got something of an allegory for my struggle. I finally found a guy who sounded similar enough to my dad. I downloaded several videos featuring him roughhousing with some anorexic 20-somethings onto my laptop, strung them together with some crude online video editing app, converted it to audio, and separated my leading man's climactic hollers from the soft whimpers. I saved the file on my computer under the codename Brand New Take on Oedipus. Last but not least, I approach my dad under the guise of needing his help for a school project, while my brother is off with his friends. I tell him I'm acting out a one-woman play for my drama midterm and I need him to be the voice of my protagonist's off-screen father. I ask him to recite a series of lines for me to record on my phone, all the while encouraging him to say them naturally. These lines include but aren't limited to, "I told you not to disturb me. What is it? Is everything all right? Now isn't a good time to talk." And, most importantly, I finished my work, so I think I'll head out to join the rest of the family at the movie theater. See you later! I move the audio files onto my laptop and eagerly anticipate approaching the turning point of my master plan. One Saturday morning, I had arranged for a session in which my folks would be out of the house and I'd be with them. Or so Elio thought. You see, my mum, dad, and younger brother were all going to the park near my house on a typical family outing. We'd go to the park, then take a walk around the local lake, and maybe catch a movie if we felt like it. We usually go around 4 to 5-ish and come back at night. I know that today will be a movie day because my baby brother has been nagging my folks to go see some kids' movie for a while, which he learned was out this weekend courtesy of yours truly. Before I left the house, I made sure my bedroom door was wide open, important for later. While at the park, I asked to play on my dad's phone, citing a low battery on mine to explain why I couldn't use it. Then I sent Elio a text telling him that Dad had just received a call from his boss telling him he had some extra work he needed to finish. I was going to be in my office across the hall from his room and could not under any circumstance be disturbed as I had a lot of stuff to do and very little time to finish it before the deadline. I waited to make sure he had read the text and sent me a thumbs-up emoji in response before I told my folks that I wanted to head back home on account of me getting an early visit from the lady in red. Not one to stand between a lass and her time of the month, my dad let me go home. Feeling like a ninja, I returned to the house, all the while sending Elio my reactions to what we'll call his cute little peach. We had technically already started the session 15 minutes ago. I crept into the house, snuck into my room on tiptoes. Thanks to my open door, I didn't have to worry about Elio hearing the creak of it from inside his room. They were next to each other. Praying he didn't come out for any reason in time to find me, I retrieved my laptop and the Bluetooth speaker I used to listen to music in the shower, and tiptoed into my dad's office, now making sure to close the door and lock it with enough force for him to hear from inside his room where I knew he was sending me the pics. I then sent Elio a text apologizing for being stuck doing something stupid, but now you've got my undivided attention, baby. Now it's time for the grand finale, in more ways than one. First, I connect my currently muted laptop to my Bluetooth speaker, which I've put at maximum volume in advance. Then, I open the Oedipus file and start to run it, while I text more and more raunchy and unhinged reactions to the incoming pictures. Just as we're approaching the end of the video containing the loudest yell, I saved the best for last, I text Elio that he's making me come so hard like the little slut he is, just in time to turn up the volume to the loudest setting on my laptop, right before the Tarzan-like whoop of passion I know is around the corner. The scream played loudly enough to break the sound barrier. Calling it merely loud was the understatement of the century. It was enough so for me to have to cover my own ears despite putting on earplugs in advance. I wouldn't have been surprised if the neighbors heard. I wouldn't be surprised if people in Siberia heard. But one thing was certain. There was no way my brother didn't. I shut off the Oedipus file, lower the volume, and keep my finger on the recordings of my dad's voice. At first, nothing happens. All is silent, not unlike the universe before the Big Bang. The mounting tension would have been enough to send me into a heart attack had I implemented this scheme in my 50s. It takes every ounce of my will not to scream from the suspense. The agony is pure torture. I feel paralyzed in anticipation, but I force myself to turn my attention to the grinder chat. I will myself to repeatedly punch in questions, asking why Elio stopped sending pics all of a sudden, while keeping my ears alert for any hint of a noise from beyond the door. Time crawls to a standstill. Then, just when I begin to wonder if the lack of results stems from me losing my grip on reality from the stress of waiting, I hear the creak of a door turning on its hinges. The sound is faint enough to make me question its existence. By now, I'm almost painfully adjusted to the waiting period, enough to the point where part of me almost wants to deny hearing it out of fear of whether or not I'll react subtly enough not to blow my cover if it's real. But it can't possibly have been real. And then I hear something else. Foot's toes across the room. It's soft, timid and hesitant, but very much present. Knock, knock, knock. I take a deep breath and prepare to play one of the tapes. The following conversation ensues. Elio on the other side of the door. Dad's pre-recorded voice. Elio, Dad, are you in there? Dad, I told you not to disturb me. What is it? Elio, how long have you been in there? Dad, I've been in here for a while. Elio, I heard a scream. Is everything okay? Dad, oh yeah. I screamed because I dropped something on my foot. I specifically encouraged my dad to say this line like he was hiding something. I'm okay now though. Don't worry about me. Elio, okay, if you say so. Dad, I love you. Elio, yeah, me too, I guess. I hear Elio go back into his room, and within seconds, I hear a notification for the grinder chat. He apologizes for the delay, and like the putty in my hands, I know he is, says exactly what I was banking on him to. Elio, you're not going to believe this, but my dad is in the next room and I heard him screaming at the same time you told me you were coming LOL. And now commences what I believe the French refer to as the pied de résistance. I leave him on read and tiptoe downstairs with my apparatus while he waits for a response. Quiet, as a mouse. Then I set up my laptop and speaker for one last audio blast. I put on my shoes and chill out for a few minutes watching his texts get more and more hysterical, begging me to respond with, "Lol, that's so weird," and to assure him it was all a coincidence. A merciful sister would have realized that avenging her dress shouldn't come at the cost of her brother's peace of mind, and come clean about the prank. I sent the following text to him. Elio, we are never going to speak of this. Not to your mom, not to your siblings, not to me. If you attempt to bring it up, you will no longer be allowed to stay in this house. We are going to put this incident behind us and go about as if nothing happened. I want you to delete your account on this website and every single picture that you posted on it. If you know what's good for you, never go back on the app again while living under my roof. Then I blocked him before the final phase of my plan. From downstairs, I blast up both volume settings and fire up the last line I asked my dad to record. I finished my work, so I think I'll head out to join the rest of the family at the movie theater. See you later. This time, I hear Elio respond, "Wait, what?" From upstairs, I can hear him coming down. Now it's time to kick it into high gear. I shove my laptop and speaker into a cabinet under the sink, jam my feet into my shoes, and sneak out through the back door and hide behind the shed. After a few hours, my folks appear in the driveway, and I rush out to welcome them back and come inside, as though I was with them the whole time. His relationship with my dad was never quite the same afterwards, and many a night for years to come, I overheard father bemoan his non-existent relationship with his little slugger. Elio ended up moving out less than a year after the prom dress incident. He finally came out via a Facebook post a week after settling into his new apartment. He blocked my parents on every social media platform and went completely NC. Any attempts on my dad's part to reignite their father-son bond was met with cold apathy and indifference when Elio wasn't flat out refusing to talk to him. For years, the only time they ever met in person was at extended family get-together. I felt a bit bad for my dad, but it worked out in the end. Elios' determination to distance himself from my dad resulted in him growing closer to me as a result. I think he didn't want to risk losing his other kids the way he did his oldest. In all honesty, I'd have been happy to let Elio fester in guilt and shame for the rest of his life. We were never really close growing up, and the prom dress incident was nothing more than the tiniest of tips on the largest of icebergs. But over the years, our relationship slowly mended, and perhaps it could have evolved into something that roughly resembled a healthy sibling relationship had he not tried to take over my wedding planning and revealed his own plans to get a free engagement ceremony, coming out party, by hijacking my reception with a proposal to his then boyfriend. I tried to reason with him, but his unyielding stubbornness forced me to pull the reverse card I hoped I'd never have to use. I sent him a text revealing that all this time Dad had no idea he was gay, and that I was the one talking to him on Grindr. I concluded my message with a warning: if he showed up, I'd have security escort him out, and afterwards I'd tell the whole family that he sexted his sister in high school, and I had the nudes to prove it. I never kept any, but he didn't know that. He might have been able to reveal I was a liar had he not deleted his old Grindr from back then. I then blocked him on all platforms before he had a chance to reply. He didn't come to the wedding. I never saw him again, and my quality of life greatly improved as a result of his absence in it. TLDR: my closeted brother secretly starts wearing my clothes in order to boost his presence as a social media drag personality. He ruins my prom dress as a result and refuses to pay me back for it when confronted. I catfish him on Grindr and trick him into believing he was sending nudes to my dad. His relationship with my family falls apart after I threaten him to never speak of what happened. I let him boil alive for years with what he thinks is his scandalous little secret, until I get engaged, and he tries to take over my wedding and use it to propose to his boyfriend. I revealed to him that I was the one pretending to be our dad all those years ago, then threatened to show his boyfriend and the rest of my family all the nudes he sent me, and accuse him of being an incestuous, perverted if he comes to the ceremony, before I block him. Honestly speaking, it was not revenge, but rather a naked injustice and unfairness on the part of OP, which cannot be justified. This heavy toll for sneaking into OP's closet is just unfair. Bye-bye for now. Let's see you tomorrow.